Imagine that you have found an old diary with several pages torn out. You are left with a lot of questions, but the answers seem to have been deliberately hidden. The same is true for the history of our planet. Today, we will talk about something global. What global cataclysm was on our planet, and why is it being hidden from us? Did you know that in any Russian state library you can find books in which not so long ago times are divided into periods before and after the flood? In the work of Nikolai Trubetsin, on Russian folk songs translated into French by Pushkin, it is said, "The sympathies of Lomonosov, Derzhavin, Novikov, Karamzin, the sympathies of the old Russian life and the desire for a new one, everything went into his complete nature in the harmonious measure in which the post-flood existence is with the antediluvian existence in the measure that is determined by the Russian soul." It may seem that this is just a catchphrase, but the more we delve into these references, the more we understand that some kind of global catastrophe was meant in the literal sense, from which we can conclude that a flood or something similar to a flood really took place in the relatively recent past, namely between the 18th and mid-19th centuries. Is it a coincidence that just during this period, allegedly in 1824, the largest and most destructive flood occurred in St. Petersburg? Then the water level rose more than 4 meters above the usual level. But if such a flood, or in the local sense, a flood, occurred only in St. Petersburg, then why during the same period do we observe exactly the same multi-meter deposits of earth in Moscow, Kazan, Saratov, and Omsk? They cover the first, and in some places, the second floors of buildings built just before the mid-19th century. Many have heard the hypothesis about a flood, or rather, about some kind of cataclysm that happened between 1790 and 1850. We have repeatedly talked about the suspiciously high cultural layer, which in some places reaches 15 meters. Of course, official science says that this is an ordinary cultural layer. They say that it grew gradually from year to year. But then how can we explain that the thickness of the humus at the cut is only a few centimeters, and then there is a thick layer of clay and sandy loam? How can we explain the fact that the cultural layer has grown by several centimeters over the past 100 years, and by several meters over the past 200 years? And what is the so-called cultural layer? According to modern science, it is a layer of earth where traces of light activity are concentrated. These are layers of the remains of buildings, household items, and other artifacts of past times. The cultural layer helps archaeologists study history. But is this really so? Could it be that this whole cultural layer concept is just a cover-up invented by historians to explain the huge number of buried houses that are found around the world and to justify the value of certain artifacts? Or could it be that there is something much more sinister behind it? Could they be deliberately revealing information about some huge catastrophe that happened in the past? Look at this photo. This is a comparison of how the view from one street in the Polish city of Lodz has changed. Pay attention to the height of the windows and doors. The cultural layer, which, according to scientists, should have grown more than a meter, is not here, as you can see. The first floor of this building, according to all the canons of official archaeology, should have left the ground by at least half. But this, as we see, did not happen. What we call the cultural layer, asphalt and paving stones, is only a surface coating. It does not significantly affect the depth of the building on the ground. Where is that mysterious cultural layer that was supposed to bury the first floors of houses underground? Maybe it just does not exist? We are talking about that very notorious cultural layer that official historians love to use to explain the first floors of old buildings covered with soil. And they even came up with a norm for the growth of this cultural layer, about half a meter to a meter per 100 years. But we can clearly see that for some reason over the last almost 130 years in the Polish city of Lodz, there has been no increase in this cultural layer. Do you think that this can only happen in Poland? Well, you guessed wrong. The cultural layer theory predicts an increase of half a meter to a meter per century. In Lodz, 0. Where is the truth? And here you are, Russia, the city of Vyatka, now known as Kirov. And here, over the past 110 years, from 1910 to 2020, we see how the myth of the cultural layer is once again shattered by harsh reality. During this time, the cultural layer has added only a few fragments in the form of asphalt. And where did the promised half a meter to a meter go in 100 years? And there are many such examples when the theory of the cultural layer obviously does not work. Archival photographs taken over the past 130 to 150 years leave no room for doubt. In the era before photographs, you could invent anything, but how to explain this phenomenon when there is photographic evidence? Let's look at Moscow. Over the past 120 to 130 years, we have not seen any real growth of the cultural layer. And here the question arises, on what basis should it suddenly grow in past centuries, so much so that buildings went underground? There is no practical evidence to support this far-fetched theory. This fairy tale, accepted by the officials, is only needed to think about hiding the truth about the catastrophes that gave birth to the underground cities of antiquity and the buried lower floors of 18th century buildings. And one more thing. Pay attention to the windows of these buildings. Neither 500 nor even 100 years ago could windows make such large openings. The technologies of that time did not create such large-scale glass structures. Compare them with the small windows of medieval buildings, and the difference will become obvious. Over the past 10 years, independent researchers have collected irrefutable evidence of the catastrophe of the past, hidden from us by the official side. This data, obtained from little-known sources, shows that the cultural layer is just a myth designed to hide the scale of what happened. Check it out yourself by comparing old and new photographs of cities. Today, this is easy to do thanks to the internet. Another problem that has not been unanimously explained is the exceptional youth of modern forests. They are almost 100% young trees that appeared 200 to 250 years ago. What? Did some huge electric saw work all over the world, which mowed down all the trees, leaving only a few dozen specimens in North America, and even fewer in Eurasia? The excuse that old trees simply did not grow to our days does not stand up to criticism. Because, for example, larch and juniper live for 500 years, prickly spruce, 400 to 600, and oak is generally more than 1,000 years old. How could all the old trees of various species be mown down all over the world, even in the most inaccessible regions, for example, in the taiga? On the internet, you can find many photographs of taiga forests, which were planted by someone quite a long time ago, as if with a ruler, in an even grid. In addition, you can provide old photographs of Russian and European settlements from the second half of the 19th century. Most of them have practically no vegetation. The slopes, which are now overgrown with young trees, were then completely bare. Another mystery of our planet is buried cities. Why did many buildings older than 200 years end up sunk into the ground by one or more floors? What unknown catastrophe covered the buildings with a thick layer of earth? Rome. To confirm this theory, let's look at the legendary Colosseum. Surprisingly, it acquired its modern appearance only at the beginning of the 20th century. Before that, the ancient structure was not visible at all. Almost completely covered with earth, it stood for several centuries. So say official scientists, how long the arena actually remained in a buried state is unknown to anyone. Maybe just a couple of hundred years? But that's not all. Let's move to the old Czech capital. Prague can also boast of underground structures. There are quite a lot of them. When the first of them was discovered in our days, there was no limit to the strangulation. However, the official answer quickly calmed everyone. The authorities responded that in the past, the city was raised to a new height, so the first floors of the buildings were filled in, allegedly for stability. Subsequently, the soil was rammed and the event itself was forgotten. And what about Egypt? Egypt, the Great Pyramids of Giza are actually also filled in. We only see their tops. But it is much easier for official historians to explain everything here. Like, what do you expect? A desert. The fact that vast spaces were found under a thick layer of sand is not surprising at all. But then why are there maps on which dozens of cities are marked and there is no trace of a desert? Images from the 17th century show us a prosperous region with a large number of settlements. Where did it all go? Let us remember that we are not talking about millennia, but about some 300 years. Of course, official scientists find an explanation for everything, the so-called cultural layer. Simply put, they argue that old buildings are covered with dust, dirt, and other waste products of any civilization. But how much do you have to dislike yourself to neglect your property so much? After all, it is much easier to sweep the area once a month than to add an entrance leading directly to the second floor as the house sinks underground. And if the house is one story, what then? This argument seems completely untenable. Almost every village has abandoned houses. Some of them are almost 100 years old. Yes, they are decaying and falling apart, but they stand quietly on solid ground and are not even going to fall anywhere. There is one more thing. If we look closely at the cross-section of the cultural layer that covers many buildings, we will see smooth soil, clay, or loam. There are no inclusions that should be in a real cultural layer. This allows us to assume that the buildings were buried in a very short period of time. People really had no choice but to build a staircase to the next floor or leave the house altogether. This is the Indonesian city of Plymouth. Here, A mud volcano eruption almost completely buried it. This happened relatively recently, which is probably why no one even tries to talk about any cultural layer. Everything is obvious. So it may well turn out that all the buried buildings are evidence of some not-so-long-ago catastrophe. The only question is, why is everything so secret?